Hello, everyone, and welcome to Finding Resources About Immigration. My name's Holly, and I'm introducing our speakers today, Emily from Museums of History and Kathy from the State Library of New South Wales. I'll start by saying that the Museums of History New South Wales and State Library of New South Wales acknowledge traditional custodians of the land and waters across New South Wales. We pay our respect to Aboriginal elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to other First Nations people also. Okay, I will hand over now to Emily, who will take you through the first part of our presentation.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Emily and I'm here from the Museums of History New South Wales State Archives collection. I'm coming to you from the land of the Darug people at Kingswood, and I'm so happy to be here today. So today's all about finding resources to do with immigration. And I'm going to take you through some of my really favourite ones from the State Archives collection. Okay, so I'm going to take you through some of my favourite resources to do with the immigration records at State Archives. And just before I do that, I will just tell you a little bit about the State Archives collection for those of you who are not familiar with us. So State Archives collection is a fairly big one these days. It spans over 90 linear kilometres and is valued at $1.069 billion. So it's fairly big. We have records that date from before 1788 right up until the present day. For instance, we do have the invitations to Gladys Berejiklian, the previous Premier, in our collection already. And we do have records that date back to before Captain Arthur Phillip arrived at Botany Bay. The State Archives collection is really the archives of the New South Wales State Government and its agencies. So we don't collect records of private people or private diaries or companies or records of other states. It's purely just the archives of the New South Wales State Government and its agencies. So, as part of that, in our collection, we do hold immigration records for people who've migrated to New South Wales. These records cover the years 1788 to 1922, and they are predominantly passenger lists, and we have them for convicts. So, convicts arrived in New South Wales between about 1788 and 1842, and then we had some in the later 1840s as well. We do have records of free passengers, so people who paid their own way to come to New South Wales, assisted passengers who were sponsored to come to New South Wales, records of crew, and these records date up to 1922. For records of immigration after 1922, we suggest you go to the National Archives of Australia and have a look at the records in their collection. So you can see a lot of resources to do with immigration on the Museums of History New South Wales website. So this is where you'll find information about the State Archives collection as well. So our website is mhnsw.au, and there's two ways to find information about the State Archives collection. So I've circled two buttons there at the top of the screen. One is collections. So if you click on that, that will take you to our collections homepage, and from there to the State Archives collection. The other thing you could do is click on the menu button, which is at the top right-hand corner of the screen there. So if you did that, you'll come up with a list of various things, and the thing to click on would be collections. So always find your way to collections. Then once you've found your way to collections, you'll be looking for subjects A to Z. So on our menu button, if you click collections, then you'll see another part of the menu pop up. Click on subjects A to Z, and that will take you to the topics of research to look in the State Archives collection. So we've listed our research topics alphabetically from A to Z, everything from Aboriginal people and accountants right down to the zoo. So for immigration resources, we suggest you click on I for immigration. and that will take you down to our immigration and shipping page. And here we've listed all of our resources to do with immigration and shipping. So all of our guides to the records, which will tell you in detail the kinds of material that we've got for immigration, as well as all of our online indexes, our webinars, and some articles about immigration and shipping. So all resources for records in the State Archives collection. So I'm not going to go through those today because we don't have half a day. But suffice it to say that you can filter by clicking on those jelly beans at the top there. So you can filter just to our guides or to our indexes, to our webinars or our articles. And then you'll just see a shorter list, which is sometimes a little bit helpful. So if I do filter just to our indexes, you can see our indexes listed here on the screen. And today I just wanted to talk quickly about our Assisted Immigrants Index and how it talks to our Assisted Immigrants Digitised Shipping Lists. So those are those first two options that you can see arrowed at the top of the screen there. So if we go to Assisted Immigrants Index first, the screen will pop up like this. So we'll see a search screen, and then we'll see a list of search results under that. So this is an index to assisted immigrants between the years 1839 and 1896. It's for people who were sponsored to come to New South Wales. So there were quite a few schemes to sponsor people or to pay for the immigration fees of people coming out to New South Wales. Sometimes they were sponsored through schemes back in the UK. And there were also schemes in New South Wales to bring people out because they were always looking for migrants and people able to work and to help build up the colony. So the index, you can search by the name of the passenger. You can search by the name of the ship. You could search by a surname. You could search by an age. You could search by a first name and a year if you wanted to do that. So there's a range of different ways you can search. In the example here, I've just picked the name Eliza Digby. There's quite a few people called Eliza Digby there. So we've got 12 different people with Eliza and Digby in the search results. The first few are people with Eliza Digby as their name. And then later on, we've got people with the first name Eliza who came out on a ship called the Digby in 1849. Quite a few people called Eliza on that ship. So it must have been a bit confusing for everybody. I can narrow down my search, by the year. So here I've just narrowed it down to 1884, and we come up with two entries for the ship called the Peterborough, arriving in Sydney in the year 1884. So we've got Eliza, who's 34, and what's probably her daughter, Eliza, who's aged 8, both on that same ship. And then underneath the search results there, you've just got some information about the index, including any abbreviations that might show up, any aliases, a note on how the indexing was done and that kind of thing. On the right-hand side of the screen there, we can see this index entry as it shows in our State Archives catalogue. So on the left-hand side, you can see there's a blue button called Details. If I click on that, it will take me straight to our catalogue, and you can see a fuller version of that index entry in the catalogue there. So we can see Eliza Digby, age 34, on the Peterborough, arriving at Sydney with her family. So it says and family. So I suppose you could go back to the index, search on the surname Digby and the year 1884 and come up with the remainder of the family there. That would be one thing you could do. So we'll take that information with us, Eliza Digby, Peterborough, 1884, and now we'll go and have a look at our digitised shipping lists. So this is where you can search by the name of the ship and the year of arrival. So here we've got the ship, the Peterborough, of which there were several different voyages, and I can see there my 1884 ship, second from the bottom. So if I click on details, again, this entry will take me to our catalogue where I can then view the passenger lists there. So we'll have a look at that screen now. And so here we are looking at that entry in our catalogue. I've clicked on details and it's given me this screen. And here I can see the entire passenger list in our image gallery there. So I just need to click on any one of those thumbnails to open them up. and then I can read through the passenger list there. And this is what it looks like. So here on this page, we've got the page for the Digby family on the Peterborough in 1884. We can see there their third family from the top. So we've got George and Eliza, age 34, and their children, George, Eliza, William, and Kate. So George at 9, Eliza 8, William 6, and Kate at 3. It tells us that they came from Lincoln. They're all Church of England, and most of the family can read and write except for the little ones who can't. The older two are at school, their father's a labourer, and there you are. So there you can see the shipping lists through our catalogue there for our assisted immigrants. The next resource I wanted to talk about is the Index to the Colonial Secretary's Letters Received, 1826 to 1896. So this is compiled from our Colonial Secretary's main series of letters received. The Colonial Secretary was really a central figure in New South Wales government in the 19th century, and people wrote to the Colonial Secretary for all kinds of things that they wanted from government. So if they wanted a grant of land, they wanted a convict, if they wanted a free railway pass, if the government had to be told that someone had gone into a psychiatric hospital, a lunatic asylum, or if someone had passed away in a lunatic asylum, or if someone wanted a job, if someone was trying to bring out migrants, if someone wanted to get naturalised, a whole range of reasons would people write to the government throughout the 19th century. And they'd often identify themselves by the ship that they came out on, or where they were born, or what they were trying to do. So this is an index that was compiled by members of the public, Mrs. Joan Rees, and then it was continued by Linda Bowman and Aileen Trinder. So over the years, all of those three ladies have compiled this index for the years 1826 to 1896. Joan started it off as handwritten index entries many years ago. She later published bits of it on microfiche and CD, and most recently, it's also been published on our website, and we're so delighted. So you find it again in our subjects A to Z, but under C for Colonial Secretary. And again, each entry has that details link at the end, which will take you to the catalogue. So there's over 205,000 entries in this index. We offer a copy service for it as well, which means that we've now got over 2,400 entries digitised and available in the catalogue for viewing. So on the right-hand side, you can see a search I've done in that index, this time for a Patrick Quinn. So sometimes you get the name of a ship. So we've got Patrick Quinn on the Minerva, aged 4 there, but often people are identified by where they were living, or whatever information might be provided there. So we've got people from Armidale, people in jail at Maitland, someone at Chippendale. We've got someone writing from Iowa in the USA, and we've got someone else who's age 13. So the next column is the citation, and this will give you the box number, but also the letter number. And the interesting thing about that is the letter number always starts by the year. So in that first entry there, 67/5492, this 67 is the year that the letter was received by the Colonial Secretary's office. So if we go for that entry for Patrick Quinn, Iowa, USA, with the letter number starting with 77, we go over to our catalogue here. And I'm very excited because as well as seeing the details about the letter, I can also see in the View Online box, there's a PDF file. So that means that this file has been digitised and we can view it online. And so this is the letter that Patrick Quinn sent to the Colonial Secretary in 1877. And he did send it from Iowa. And if you're a family history minded, this is a fantastic letter. It tells us that he was employed by the government in the roads department. He's worked at places like Penrith, Campbelltown, Hanging Rock, and he worked on the roads, keeping them in repair, etc. But he was also collecting monies for the government, for the road commissioner at Sydney in Hanging Rock. He said that he resigned to go and see his wife's relations in America, but he's spent all, hasn't obtained permanent employment there and doesn't like the country. And he was unwilling to take the oath of allegiance to the government there. So he'd like to come back to New South Wales. He then goes on to name drop various people that he knows in New South Wales, various parliamentarians and religious people. And he also gives us details about his age, his wife's age. So he's 37 and she's 40. And the two boys, their children, are 16 and 20, and they're very vigorous, as well as him and his wife. So he's asking for a passage to come back to New South Wales. And he also wants to say that he's lectured a bit while he's in the US on New South Wales, including on its climate, its production, its farming, and things like that, and would like to be employed in the capacity of lecturer in New South Wales if he possibly could. So unfortunately for Patrick Quinn, the note there on the back of the letter on the side, on the left-hand side, says, an assisted passage is never granted from Great Britain by the Agent General if it is discovered that the applicant has previously been in the colony. Oh dear. And then on the right side, it says, may be informed it cannot be granted. Unfortunately, the records don't tell us what happened to Patrick, but I do hope that things ended up all right for him and his family. Our next letter from the Joan Rees Index, the Index to Colonial Secretaries' Papers, is one by the name of John O'Brien. So again, we've done a search for the name John O'Brien, and we've come up with a range of different people, one who's dead, one who was in jail, one whose father was called Jeremiah, someone from Windsor, someone who came on the recovery in 1823, and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is the two letters there that I've put the arrows against, they're actually the same letter. So I can see 912153. So we've got like a cross-reference happening. We've got John O'Brien, and it talks about Salvator to USA, and it also talks about Cutty Sark crew. So is that interesting? Well, could be. So we'll go and have a look at that letter, which is here. And what it actually is a letter from Kate O'Brien. So Kate is married to John in 1891. She's in London. She's writing from her home in London to the British consul in Sydney. And she hasn't heard from her husband for quite some time. He was working as a steward on board the Cutty Sark, but she felt that there must have been some sort of disagreement and he was discharged from then. She hasn't heard from her husband since October. She's writing in January, and she's worried that something's happened to him. And she says she's hoping that the British consul can do something. She's very, very anxious about him as they're separated by so many thousands of miles, and hoping that she can let her know, he can let her know something. And so also attached to this letter is a report from the police station at Newcastle. So Senior Constable James Shearer has written back to the Colonial Secretary to say that he's gone on board the American schooner the Salvator, now at the port of Newcastle, making inquiries about John O'Brien. He's the cook, and his name is John O'Brien, formerly employed on the Cutty Sark as cook, but had a dispute with the captain and was discharged at Sydney. The senior constable showed Kate's letter to the cook, John O'Brien, who said, yes, that's my wife's writing, that's me. He wrote home to his wife on the 15th of November. He's employed on the Salvator now as the cook, and she's going to Honolulu, then to San Francisco, and then he intends to ship another vessel back for England. So this letter's forwarded to the police, Inspector General of Police, and then forwarded to the Colonial Secretary. And then everyone knows that John O'Brien has been found. I only hope that Kate was also told that her husband had been found, but I'm sure that if they've gone to such an effort to find him, they would have written the letter back. But unfortunately, our letters sent for that period don't survive. And that's just a picture of the Cutty Sark down the bottom there. And finally here, if you just looked up under O'Brien and that letter number, you can see also that Kate is mentioned too. So everybody gets a mention in the letter, which is really nice to see. And finally, we also have applications for naturalisation, and people who came from non-British countries did have to get naturalised if they wanted to vote or they wanted to buy land. So here we have an example of a John Manuel who's applied to be naturalised. It gives us the name of the ship that he arrived on and the year that he arrived, importantly. And it's got his signature, his mark down the bottom there, and also where he's come from. So he's come from the Western Islands belonging to Portugal, and he's aged 28 and a labourer. So big yays for family history, immigration records in the Colonial Secretary's papers. My last example for today is a new lot of records that have been recently digitised and uploaded to Ancestry. So Ancestry is a subscriber website, but the State Library, many public libraries around New South Wales, and in our reading room, we all provide access for free to Ancestry. So this is something that you can look up yourself. If you don't have Ancestry at home, you can go to one of those places, hopefully not too far from you. So immigration records 1840 to 1902. These are records that were digitised from originals in the State Archives collection, so they weren't copied before. The indexes, the images were published in Ancestry. There's over 105,000 records, and they have appear to be working through the indexing of them. So they've definitely indexed the highlighted series there. And we think they might have also been working on listing the ship's papers, which is the next one down. So these are awesome records. Our particular favourites are the ship's papers, which were just papers that were gathered together on particular voyages about particular assisted immigrant ships. And they contain all sorts of things. So we haven't got ship's papers for every assisted immigrant ship, but where we do have them, they're just wonderful. So they can give you detail about the migrants on board the ship. There might be character references that were signed in the UK before some of these people got on board the ship, or you might get an employment agreement for when they were getting off the ship, for example. So you can actually find that golden unicorn, what happened to someone when they left an immigrant ship, if there are ship's papers. So if there are ship's papers and you've got someone on board that ship, they're well worth a look at. So on the left here from the La Hogue in 1872, we've got a character reference for Sarah Clark by her employer, Mrs. Garnett, from Belfast in 1872. And then on the right there, we've got a servants agreement between Phoebe West and W.A. McRae in Sydney from September of that year. More ship's papers here. We've got a schoolmaster's report from the Fitzjames, which came out in 1860. So this is a school that was running on board the ship during the voyage, and it runs through the students and how they were doing. So that's really exciting. And then on the left, the right-hand side here, we've got a report of the disposal of immigrants who left the ships without entering into formal engagements. So what happened to these people? Well, this is a bit of a clue about where to look next. So you can get some wonderful stuff, and these are all digitised and available on Ancestry. Some of the other records are things like the records of wages that were paid to orphans and who paid them. So again, giving you a clue about what happened to some of these orphan girls after they left their ships in the late 1840s, early 1850s. And here we've got an orphans account book, which is a similar notion. So it's money being paid to or on behalf of orphans and who that money is being paid by and how much it was. So again, just giving you a bit more of a clue about what was happening to some of these immigrants once they arrived in New South Wales. Now, my time is nearly up and I have to hand over to Kathy. But I hope that's given you just a bit of a taste of some of the fun records that you can access to do with immigration from the New South Wales State Archives collection. So, Kathy, I'm hoping that you're there, and I'm going to hand over to you and just to say thank you to everyone for listening.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see that screen well. I'm Kathy, and I'm presenting today's talk about finding immigration resources at the State Library of New South Wales. I'm coming to you today from Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, past and present, and extend that respect to First Nations people joining us today. Thanks, Emily, for that informative and entertaining discussion about the key resources for immigration at the State Library, in the State Archives. I think I'm still a bit devastated about Patrick Quinn and family being refused assisted passage. Emily will be back later to help me with some questions too. But once you have the names of passenger ships and arrival dates from the shipping records held by the State Archives, these facts may be fleshed out using the collections of the State Library of New South Wales. So what do we collect here at the State Library of New South Wales? We collect the personal papers of individuals and families and the archives of private organisations and businesses from New South Wales. Our collections help tell the rich and diverse story of New South Wales and Australia. For example, amongst our personal papers, we might have a diary written by a passenger who travelled on the same ship as your ancestors. We also have over 250,000 artworks that say something about the lives and times of the people of New South Wales. So we might have a picture of the ship that brought your ancestor to Australia, or sketches of shipboard life and locations. Of course, we are a library, so we do also collect published items like books, pamphlets, and electronic resources. And in our collection, for example, we have handbooks for prospective emigrants to prepare them for their voyage to Australia. And we also hold pamphlets and newspaper reports about emigration in our electronic resources. So today I'm going to highlight some key resources relating to 19th century immigration in our collection, such as emigrant guides, passenger journals, shipboard newspapers, and ship's pictures. And even if they don't mention your family directly, these diaries and sketches, journals and handbooks bring to life the experience of a long voyage to Australia undertaken by thousands of immigrants in the 19th century and inform about common themes and shared events. So let's begin with emigrant guides. Guides such as this one here were available to help emigrants prepare for the voyage with advice about what to expect on board. Now, many of these guides have been digitised and they can be found through the State Library of New South Wales catalogue and also on Trove. And they provide a fascinating insight into conditions on board emigrant ships in the 19th century. This handbook, called Out at Sea, or The Emigrant Afloat, was published in 1863, and it has advice about the choice of ship, the best time to sail, the fitting up of the berth, and on this page it has information about what clothing and utensils to take. So all passengers were required to provide sufficient clothing, utensils and bedding for the long sea voyage, and even second and third class cabin passengers were required to outfit their own berths for the voyage. So the guide suggests taking utensils such as a chamber pot, a slop pail, saucepans, water cans for each member of the family, looking glasses, and also 24 hooks to screw into the ceiling and sides of the berth, because everything, including cups, saucers, knives, forks, and spoons, had to be hung from the ceiling or bolted to the floor, including the slop pail, to stop it shifting when the ship rolled in bad weather. Steerage passengers who had the cheapest accommodation on the passenger ship slept in dorm-like conditions in bunks, and they could only bring a few personal effects in the bags provided. So the Emigrant Guide also lists the rations provided on board and suggests how to cook them, with recipes for treacle pudding, suet pudding, rice pudding, and sea pie. First class passengers or saloon passengers did not need to cook their meals. They were prepared by a ship's cook and served by a steward, but second and third class cabin and also steerage passengers were required to cook their own food. The guide recommends that the people who could afford it to take extra provisions, such as cheese, ham, red herrings, sardines, and more coffee and tea. So Passengers travelling to Australia during the late 19th century often kept journals to pass the long months at sea. And we have many of these in our collection that have either been donated by the family or purchased from vendors or at auction over the years. And some of these, like this one here, have been digitised onto our catalogue, and some are also available on Trove too. So these journals provide an insight into everyday life aboard an emigrant ship, while their content and style reveal the personality of the writer as well as conditions experienced by the different classes and sexes on board. As many diarists encountered similar experiences during the voyage, 19th century journals can be a useful source of information for family historians who can imagine or recreate the journey that their ancestor took, because they often followed the same narrative. They usually began when the ship left the port, and then once on board, emigrants described seasickness, and then as the voyage progressed, they record sighting islands, crossing the equator, being stuck in the doldrums, and as they head south, freezing weather, icebergs, flying fish, and birds. So here you can see excerpts from the journal of WSM, who recounts his voyage on the steamship the Harbinger that sailed from Southampton to Port Phillip and then Sydney in 1853, and it took 65 days. So here, the first entry in his diary, he describes leaving the port at Southampton, very calm weather. And then later on, he describes they encountered very bad weather, and then a large bellow went over the ship and washed everything away. He also illustrated his journal with some lovely watercolours. So here on the left, you can see a watercolour of the emigrants on the main deck in their southwester hats and their bonnets and their coats. And also here at the top right, you can see that he's drawn a picture of the canvas bag that emigrants were provided to keep their clothes and also supplies they needed for the actual voyage. And he also drew trunks, or his trunk, where the remainder of his luggage was stored in the hold. So depending on the ship and the weather, passengers may have had access to their trunks only once or twice during the voyage. In bad condition, many emigrants were stuck in damp, dirty clothes and bedding for weeks at a time. So another diary in our collection shows the single female immigrant experience. So this is 34-year-old Fanny Shorter, who made the voyage from Plymouth to Brisbane as an assisted immigrant in 1884. So like other steerage passengers, single women were organised into messes of between 6 to 10 adults. And then under a matron's supervision, single women would eat their meals and perform their chores with other members of their mess. And here on this page, Fanny describes being the captain of her mess. So she was a captain of number 5 mess today, and she had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to give out the water can for the constable to fill up so we can all have a wash, and then get out on deck by 8 o'clock for breakfast. She also describes being divided on deck from the married people by a wooden fence, and that was to protect the moral character of the single women. They were strictly segregated from other passengers during the voyage. She also had a constable on who had to stand by the gate to see that the single women didn't talk to the male passengers or crew. So the final journal I wanted to mention is the journal of Charles Scott on board the ship, the Annie Wilson, and it left Liverpool for Sydney in 1859. It had 405 government emigrants on board and took 101 days to do the trip. So the assisted passenger lists at the State Archives lists all the passengers on board with their details. There's also newspaper reports in Trove about the voyage, including that it hit an iceberg, but it was all okay. But we here at the Mitchell Library, we have the original diary. It is very fragile. As you can see here, it was in the hands of the family until 1962, when it was donated by the great-grandson to the Mitchell Library, and we're very grateful for that. It has since been published, and we have the book in our collection too. So in the book, Charles Scott describes his fellow passengers. He describes illness, births and deaths, our daily entertainments on the voyage. Here, he describes an infestation of lice. So mattresses out upon deck, saw one pair of blankets belonging to an Irish family alive with them, saw the lice basking in the sun upon their clothes. And he also describes births and deaths, including this one. A woman passenger confined at 4 o'clock this morning. Doctor christened the child the same as our ship, Annie Wilson. And that was my great-grandmother, Joanna O'Shea. So how do you find a ship's log? How do you know if it exists and where it is held? Well, you could search the State Library's catalogue, of course, and you can also search Trove. But there's also a book called Log of Logs. In fact, it's 3 books, and you need to check all 3 because they're all different. We have it here in the library. Most state libraries would have them, a lot of public libraries too, but it's also been digitised. Just Google Log of Logs and it'll come up. So what is it? It is a catalogue of logs, journals, shipboard diaries, letters, and all forms of voyage narratives, 1788 to 1993 for Australia and New Zealand and surrounding oceans, held in institutions in Australia and New Zealand, and it also includes the British Library. So I've included a few pages from Log of Logs, and you can see the format. It lists the ship's name, the type of ship, sometimes the tonnage, and then the voyages. And then that's where the surviving logs are held. So if we can see here on the right-hand side, Annie Wilson, if you can see here, it's got some information about the log. It's held in ML for Mitchell Library. So with the sea voyage taking up to 4 months, 19th century emigrants formed committees to organise shipboard entertainment and amusements. And one such activity was the production of a ship's newspaper. We have several shipboard newspapers in our collections, and some, such as the Massilia Gazette, have been digitised. The Massilia Gazette was produced on a typewriter during the voyage, but like many of these shipboard newspapers, they were reprinted in Sydney after the voyage at the expense of the passengers to become like a souvenir, but they give a lot of information. So they usually include the ship's log, and then sometimes they include sporting results, and by that I mean the 3-legged race or the sack race. They often have poetry and prose, fashion, correspondence, and sketches of scenery and passengers, and information also about the ship's destinations. Sometimes the names of passengers were included in shipboard newspapers, but usually only the cabin passengers, not usually steerage. And this was probably because the cabin class editors didn't probably know that their names or didn't consider the steerage immigrants important enough. They probably never saw them. So you can see here, you can see a little excerpt from the Massilia showing the cabin class passengers, listing them by destination. So I've also included a few pages from another shipboard newspaper we have in our collection, the Illustrated Iberian, published in 1887. And here on the left-hand side, you can see the results of an athletic meeting held in Iberia Park on the ship, and the results of the tug of war and the obstacle race and the soda water race. Also, you can see sketches of fellow passengers and fashions for the week. And on the right-hand side, there's some amusing columns. One written by George Grubber called My Fellow Prisoners, and it's about all the gripes he has about the fellow passengers. And then this one, a letter to the editor by a suffering and ill-used gentleman who is quite offended because he heard the women in the cabin next door are laughing about his mustache. So as I said before, we have over 250,000 artworks, including oil paintings, prints, drawings, and watercolours. We collect artwork for the documentary value, although we do have many items of great aesthetic value, such as this beautiful digitised oil painting of the SS Great Britain departing Liverpool for Australia in 1860. We call this a ship's portrait because its main focus is a single ship. Now, the SS Great Britain often carried more than 600 passengers and crew between Liverpool and Australia, And the ship made the voyage 32 times between 1852 and 1875. And while I was researching for this talk, I found that you can actually visit the SS Great Britain itself in Bristol. It's a museum and it's Bristol's #1 attraction. So I'm not sure if anyone's visited this ship or this museum. Here is another ship's portrait in a more dramatic style. This is called the Shamrock, speaking the packet ship, the St. George off Cape Dromedary in New South Wales. The Shamrock's the paddle steamer at the front with the wheel, and a packet ship is a ship that carried mail and parcels. And to speak or speaking another ship means to manoeuvre near enough to another ship at sea in order to exchange greetings and news. So the paddle steamer, the Shamrock, it ran fortnightly trips between Sydney, Melbourne and Launceston between 1841 and 1857 for the Hunter River Steam Navigation Company. And maybe your ancestor travelled on the Shamrock either up or down the coast. The library also holds a number of significant shipboard drawings with impressions of life on board, including this evocative image of the Thornbury family passing its time on deck of the City of Adelaide in 1881. So the shipping columns of the Town and Country Journal on Trove list the arrival of the steamer, the City of Adelaide. It arrived in Sydney in July 1881, and it lists the cabin passengers only, including Mrs. E. Thornbury, child and servant, a Miss Thornbury, maybe that's her here, and 2 Master Thornbury, so one's missing by the looks. You can tell that the Thornburys were first-class passengers, not just because we have a portrait of the family in our collection, but also because they have so much space on the ship. First-class passengers such as the Thornburys had exclusive use of the poop deck for their leisure. It was the highest deck of the ship, at the rear of the ship, whereas passengers with lower class tickets would have been confined to the lower main deck if they weren't down below in the steerage quarters, which were dark and crowded with poor ventilation. I'm really selling it, aren't I? So collecting ships' pictures was a popular hobby in the 19th century, and we have various collections of ships' pictures in albums arranged and donated by donors like the Dixon Gregory collection, the Nichols collection, and the Ernest Best postcard collection. So commercially produced postcards of ships were made as souvenirs for nautical collectors and arranged into albums too. So you don't need to remember the names of these collections, because we do on our website, we have a ship's pictures research guide. It's like a checklist of places to check for ship's pictures. Some of our images have been digitized in some of the guides too. And don't forget, of course, that there are other libraries that have ship's pictures, like the National Library of Australia and all the state libraries in Australia. So check Trove for those. And there's other institutions too, like the Australian National Maritime Museum in Sydney and the National Maritime Museum in the UK. So my last slide is about e-resources. So we have some e-resources about immigration that are available from home with your state library card. You might not find names and dates, but you might find background information about immigration to Australia. So the first one I want to mention is Migration to New Worlds. This resource focuses on European emigration to the United States, Canada and Australasia during the 19th and 20th century. And I found it had some really good emigrant handbooks to Australasia. Some of these ones we don't have. They're fully digitized. The next e-resource or database I wanted to mention was JSTOR. You may have heard of that if you're studying at university or you have a child doing the HSC. It's a scholarly database, and it has journals, but it also has some original materials like the 19th century British pamphlet collection. Pamphlets were an important mean of public debate in the 19th century, and JSTOR includes pamphlets about immigration, topics like Irish immigration, British immigration, and female immigration are mentioned in the pamphlets there. And then finally, Gale historical newspapers and ProQuest historical newspapers. They include British newspapers of the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. So here you might find an advertisement or notice about free immigration to Australia, or you might find an advertisement for ships and shipping lines, or even letters from migrants writing home to relatives, reporting on their experience in the colony, and they weren't always favourable. So if you wanted to get a library card, you can apply on our website. We will email you the card number the next day and then post you the physical card later. If you wanted to use databases or e-resources, you need to be a New South Wales resident, but don't forget, you can also get a National Library of Australia card. And of course you can, I'm sure all the state libraries in Australia have these databases as well. And we are going to have some questions now, but if there are any that we can't answer, you can fill in the Ask a Librarian form. We can do up to 1 hour's research. We don't do ongoing family history research, but we can guide you into the best resources. We can tell you what we have here, and we can refer you to other organisations like the State Archives. So that brings me to the end of the of my slideshow.